Chapter 7. Right now, Brian asked. Why not? Brian stared at Alan. I know how to jumpstart a car, Brian told him. My dad taught me. Go for it. Really? Brian asked. Let's do it. Brian gazed at the car. He felt as if the Cataluna understood them, dared him to take it. Amazing thought that Cataluna could be his, right now. Whoa, it's a crazy idea, Brian declared. Remember what happened to those two guys who stole a car off this lot a few weeks ago? They bailed out and a truck ran over them. I don't want to end up as roadkill. Forget about it then. I wasn't serious, Alan laughed. Brian reddened. Me neither, he lied. I was just kidding around. For sure, I was. Anyway, it's easy for you to say let's do it. You're rich. Your parents could buy you 10 Catalunas. They both stared at the car, the sleek curves. I'm telling you, Brian said in a hushed voice. This is the prettiest thing I've ever seen. After Misty Clark, you mean, Alan teased him. Brian smiled. I don't know about that. They both laughed. I'll find a way to get this car, Brian thought. I know I will. Hi, Bri. Oh, hi. Not that I'm keeping count, but this is the 6th time I've had to call you first, Missy told him. Really? You okay? You sound in a rush or something. Sorry, it's just... Just what? He couldn't tell her. Just nothing. Oh, so anyway, you want to come over and study together? Her tone made it clear that they wouldn't be spending all their time doing homework. Brian wanted to see Misty, but... Misty, I'm sorry, but I can't right now. Misty didn't answer. Great. I've disappointed her again, Brian thought. I was headed out the door, he explained. He started to tell her his plan, but something stopped him. I'm on my way to the flower store to make some deliveries, he lied. Brian, she said, you don't have to give excuses, not to me. When you want to see me, I want to see you. It's that simple. Misty really did care about him. Unreal. How about I come over in like a couple of hours, he asked a little hoarsely, or maybe a couple of minutes. Great. She sounded less hurt now that she knew he had to work. Wow, Brian thought as he hung up. That story about the flower shop is probably the first lie I ever told her, and it had been so easy. She felt better, too. Maybe he should rethink this whole honesty business. Brian parked and locked his bike on Laurel Avenue, a couple of blocks away from the used car lot. If the salesman saw him ride in on his old bike, they'd never take him seriously. He hurried over to the lot, heading straight for the Cataluna. He glanced back and forth, no one around. Hi, he told the car. He patted the smooth curve of the hood. Bright sunlight reflected off the windshield like a burst of fire. Brian turned toward the glass-walled main office. He cupped a hand over his eyes to block out the glare. Why isn't anyone coming over? He made his way across the lot to the office. A broad-shouldered man with dark, shiny hair stopped talking as Brian approached. The other salesman, an older man, stared at Brian. What's up? I'm interested. He forgot what he had planned to say. He started again. I wanted to take one of the cars out for a test drive. Lou, the older salesman said, you've got a customer. You got a license? The dark-haired salesman asked. Yeah, sure. Brian fumbled in his pocket for his wallet. It seemed to stick to his jeans. He found the license and handed it to the salesman. Misty, Alan, and Brian all passed their test on the same day. Only Brian didn't have a car yet. The young salesman handed him back the card. He's going to tell me to get lost, Brian thought. What kind of car were you interested in? The salesman asked. Oh, I'm only interested in one car. The white sports car. The Cataluna. The salesman whistled. You got taste, kid. That's a beautiful car. You hear that, Jack? He wants to test drive the Cataluna. Great car, the older salesman agreed. I love it, gushed Brian. The salesman eyed him. The Cataluna is a lot of money, but we can work out the financing. You'll need to put down $1,000. Might as well be $1 million, Brian thought glumly. I'm not fooling this guy either. He knows I don't have a dime. A fantasy played through Brian's mind. He pictured himself coming back tomorrow and buying the Cataluna from the same salesman, paying in cash, and throwing in a whopping tip. Keep the change, he'd say with a wink. Then he'd smile at the other salesman, the older guy. Bet you wish you waited on me the other day. This tip would have been yours. 1,000 down, Brian replied, trying to sound matter-of-fact. You're still interested? Uh-huh. Well, I don't have the whole amount right now, but I'm working on it, Brian explained. I'm planning to buy the car very soon. The salesman hardly listened. Uh-huh, great, he said with a sigh. He grabbed a key from his desk. Brian couldn't believe it. So I can drive it. Why not? It's not like I've got so much else to do. Yes, thought Brian, amazed. I'm going to drive the car. Brian hurried across the lot to the Cataluna. The salesman opened the door for him. Hop in, he instructed. Brian settled into the plush red leather seat. I must be dreaming, he thought, and I never want to wake up. The salesman climbed in the passenger side. You okay? He asked. You're not going to faint on me or something, are you? I'm fine, Brian answered quickly. The salesman handed Brian the ignition key. It glistened. Mother of pearl circled the top. Brian held his breath as he pumped the gas once, then started the engine. The engine barely made a sound. Without the little lights glowing in the silver dashboard, he wouldn't have been sure the motor turned over. Brian guided the car off the lot. Turn right, the salesman instructed him. We'll go down Laurel Avenue where there isn't much traffic. The car handled beautifully. Brian barely had to touch the wheel. They passed Brian's bike. It had never appeared so old and babyish to him. Brian slipped into another fantasy. He and Misty driving back from the prom and... Hi, Brian. The female voice startled him out of his daydream. He glanced over at the salesman. Did you hear that? Hear what? Brian stared down at the radio. Off. Hi, Brian. You and I are going to have fun together. He checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. What are you searching for, Brian? He turned around to study the red leather seat behind. Empty. He heard the girl laughing. Watch out! The salesman shouted. Brian turned around. Hey, I can't stop. Chapter 8. No! Brian let out a sharp cry as he slammed forward. The seatbelt dug into his chest. He heard the crunch of metal, saw bright sparks fly all around. His head snapped back hard. Pain shot down his neck. Were the sparks inside his head? What happened? Brian shook his head hard. He stared groggily through the windshield, and saw that he had smashed the car into a lamppost. For a long while the salesman sat in stunned silence. Then he started shouting, calling Brian worse names than anything Mr. Robbins ever had. Brian backed the car off the curb, turned off the motor. He jumped out of the car and ran to inspect the damage. The salesman followed him. Brian gasped in surprise. Only a few scratches on the Cataluna's silver fender. When Brian rubbed some spit on them, they disappeared. The car is totally fine, Brian uttered. He couldn't resist a big smile. He felt so relieved. He would have wanted to die himself if he wrecked the Cataluna. The salesman glared at him. Without another word, he strode to the driver's side and got in. Hey, wait, Brian cried. Come back when you learn how to drive, kid, the salesman muttered. He slammed the door. Then he pulled back out on the road and roared away. Brian stood stranded on the side of the road, staring after the Cataluna. Beautiful, amazing. It disappeared from sight. I need that car. Brian remembered the strange voice. You and I are going to have fun together. I'll do anything to get the Cataluna, Brian thought. Anything. Brian parked a small white minivan, leaving the engine running. He walked around and opened the double doors and back. He checked his delivery list. Sanderson, 119 Bethune Street. He found the bouquet with the matching label and started up the walk. 2 weeks had gone by, and he still hadn't found a second job to replace Happy Burgers. And his manager at the flower shop, Mr. Gunther, wouldn't add any extra hours to his delivery schedule. Time is running out, he told himself as he rang the front bell. He wasn't the only one with eyes in his head. Anyone would want the Cataluna. No answer at the Sanderson house. Terrific. That meant two things. Brian would have to bring the flowers back to the store, and a different delivery boy would get the tip. He rang again. Then he knocked. The door opened an inch. He gave it a nudge. Mrs. Sanderson, flower delivery here. You have a nice bouquet. He stuck his head inside, tried calling again. Fancy stuff, Brian muttered. The chrome and leather living room furniture reminded him of the things Misty and Alan had in their houses. He called one more time. No answer. Might as well leave the flowers, he thought. He set the bouquet on the end table near the door. He turned to go. Then he noticed the wallet. A woman's wallet, large, thick, with a metal clasp. It lay on the glass coffee table in the living room. Hello, he called again. Mrs. Sanderson, delivery. He heard the deep ticking of a clock. Nothing else. He glanced at the wallet again. Don't even think about it, he ordered himself. But he started across the thick oriental carpet toward the table, and the wallet. He stared down at the wallet, afraid to touch it. Then he realized something that made him start to sweat. He should have carried the flowers with him. That way, if someone walked in, he'd have an excuse for standing all the way over here instead of by the door. Get out of here, he silently ordered himself. Wait, Brian thought. I deserve a tip at least. He opened the wallet, pulled out crisp bills, all hundreds. Brian stuffed 2 hundreds into the front pocket of his jeans. He couldn't get the other bills back in the wallet. His hands were shaking too hard. He crumpled the bills and shoved them inside as best he could. He turned to leave, trembling all over, moving so quickly that he banged his knee on the glass edge of the table. "Hey, is someone in there?" a woman called. Chapter 9. Panic stabbed his chest, made him gasp. Brian lurched toward the front door. He caught a glimpse of a woman marching down the hallway. Right toward him, only one place to hide, the front coat closet. He ducked inside, pulling the door partly closed behind him. He could smell mothballs. He wanted to press back into the row of coats, but the hangers might jangle. He heard the woman walking around the living room. "Please don't look in the closet," he prayed. "Please don't look in here. I promise I will never ever do this again if you please don't look in the..." The footsteps click-clacked against the wooden floor, coming toward Brian. They stopped outside the closet door. Brian's heart stopped too. Then he heard a rustle of cellophane. "Oh!" the woman exclaimed. "A delivery." More rustling. "Oh, that's nice. He remembered." The footsteps clicked away. Brian forced himself to count to 10 before opening the closet door and bolting from the house. Outside, he raced down the sidewalk to his van. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," he cursed himself. 10 times as dumb as throwing that grease at Mr. Robbins. 100 times. At his next delivery, the customer stared at him strangely. Brian realized perspiration had run down his face and soaked his shirt. As he returned to the florist shop, he finally started to calm down. Then he remembered the money. He had been so scared he almost forgotten about it. He pulled over to the side of the road and parked. Then he pulled out the 2 bills, admired the crisp new hundreds. He didn't even know he was on a $100 bill. He read the fine print. Benjamin Franklin. "Hello, Ben. Nice to meet you." He added the money to the soiled $5 bill in his own wallet. That wasn't so hard, he told himself, and I'm $200 richer. He gripped the wheel. A few $100 more, and he could make the down payment on the car. And now he knew how to get that money. Steal it. So easy. What could go wrong? Part 3. West Hampshire Colony, 1698. Chapter 10. "I think we all know the purpose of this meeting," Edmund Parker announced. He clasped his hands together in front of him as if this were a Sunday prayer meeting. "For some time now, our colony has suffered at the hands of evil forces. I think we all know what, or should I say who, is responsible. Still, we must be mindful of what we do here tonight. Do I need to remind anyone of the serious accusation we are making against Catherine Hatchett?" Silence filled the meeting hall. Hidden in the shadowy corner by the front door, Catherine watched with horror. There sat all the elders of the town, their faces stony. No one leaped to his feet. No one shouted out a protest in her defense, not even her parents. Her mother and father huddled together by themselves on one of the long wooden benches. Catherine studied their faces. They would defend her, of course, but could they persuade the whole colony of her innocence? Could 2 people stand up against this whole mob? The testimonies began. "In the spring that my troubles started," said Luther Grady, nervously rubbing a finger along his bony jaw, "I found Catherine in my yard playing with her pony Nellie. I remember I gave a terrible shudder when I spied the girl there. I think in my heart I knew that I'd been cursed. Only 2 weeks after that, Nellie took sick and died. She died a horrible death, too, all bloated and moaning." Angry murmurs rose from the townspeople gathered in the hall. The stories went on and on. Catherine wanted to run, but she couldn't. She needed to hear. One man blamed the failure of his crops on Catherine. One woman claimed that her bread hadn't risen the day Catherine gave her a strange look in the town square. At last, Edmund Parker took the floor once again. He stared right at Catherine's parents. "Everyone has spoken, I believe," Edmund Parker called. "And now the time has come to hear from the Hatchetts themselves. Adam, you have heard the sentiments of the colony here tonight, but you must speak your heart and your whole heart, unafraid of our disapproval, unminding of what we have said." Adam Hatchett appeared deathly pale. He cleared his throat several times. When he spoke, Catherine could barely make out the words. "My wife will speak for both of us on this matter," he said quietly. Catherine's heart pounded. Her mother stood, smoothing out the folds of her gray cloak. Catherine began to cry silently. Through the years, her mother had often been impatient with her, even angry, but she loved her still, Catherine knew. Her mother would stop this madness. She would never let any harm come to her daughter. I have listened to all your stories, Catherine's mother began, and each story has been like a stake driven into my heart. Catherine's tears flowed more freely. It hurts to hear a loved one talked about this way. Truly, I never like to complain of my burdens, but the pain of this is so terrible you could never imagine it. I know that I could not have imagined it before this day. Yes, yes, thought Catherine. But... Martha Hatchett paused. That one word, but, turned Catherine's blood to ice. But, her mother continued sadly, Adam and I have known for some time, that something is terribly wrong with Catherine. We have tried to blind ourselves to the truth, but now... Martha Hatchett lifted a hand, let it fall. There is no other choice. I understand that now. We must drive the bad luck from our colony. The crowd erupted in bloodthirsty cheers. Catherine could not move, could not breathe. I did not hear that right, she told herself. Could not have. Her father leaped to his feet. She is not our child, he called hoarsely. Catherine felt as though her head had split down the middle. Not their child. What was he saying? Several people gasped. A few rose to their feet. What does he mean? He is lying. No, Adam Hatchett cried. I tell the truth at last. Our own child died at birth. We found Catherine on our doorstep. That is a lie, Catherine silently prayed. This is a lie. Please forgive us, begged Adam Hatchett. We had hoped and prayed for a family for so long. Then our baby... He hung his head, weeping. He could not go on. Martha Hatchett spoke for him, continuing the confession. And so we took Catherine in, and we never said a word. More cries from the villagers. A grave sin, admitted Mistress Hatchett. But how could we know? How could we know she was a child of evil? When the meeting quieted back down at last, her mother and father each told stories about the horrors of raising Catherine. Catherine no longer heard them. The room was spinning. Her own parents, lying, betraying her, denying her birth. No! She pressed herself against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. Catherine started for the door, tripped, heads turned. She ran. She jumped off the wooden porch and started across the lawn. Then she stopped again, gasping for air as if she had been running for miles. She glanced left, right. Which way? Where could she go? Catherine whirled and faced the doorway to the meeting house. She expected the townspeople to come pouring out like a swarm of angry hornets leaving the hive. No one came. Maybe no one had seen her after all. An idea had formed in her mind, a place she could turn to for refuge. She raced toward the house with a dying cabbage patch in back. Joseph Parker always warned her not to come to his house. It's not safe, he told her. They could only meet in the woods. But now nowhere in the colony was safe for Catherine, and she had only one friend left. She had to find him right away. Joseph. Joseph loved her. Joseph would protect her. She would not have to face this evil, this horror, alone. She raced past the Parkers' fenced-in garden and around to the front, banged in through the front door, and gasped. Chapter 11. Joseph sat by the fireplace, his strong arms wrapped around a pretty red-headed girl. The girl had a spray of freckles across her apple cheeks. When Catherine burst into the room, both Joseph and the girl turned and stared at her in shock. Joseph with another girl? That meant he did not love her. Her last dream, her last hope, crumbled before her eyes. But she did not have time, not for jealousy, not to feel her heart break, even though the hurt and anger seared through her like fire. Joseph, she cried, you must help me. The whole town, the meeting, your father, they're going to banish me. Joseph stared at her blankly. Yes, Catherine, so they are. And what do you expect me to do about it? Did you want me to ride you out of town myself? He smiled at the girl, and both of them started laughing. No, please, she thought, no. Joseph, She couldn't go on. Hot tears stung her cheeks. It is your own fault, she heard the girl say nastily. You've brought this down on yourself. Catherine felt the rage surging inside her. She wanted to claw at the girl's eyes. But she turned back to Joseph. Joseph, there is no time to waste. Please, I heard them with my own ears. If I ever meant anything to you. Joseph stood swiftly. And what could a witch like you mean to me, eh, Catherine? What vile lies are you spinning now? How dare you come into a respectable home and... Catherine backed away. She stumbled out the door. She heard more laughter from inside the cottage. Then she turned and fled. Rage made her run faster than she ever had run in her life. Crazy, she silently shouted at herself. Crazy to trust a boy like Joseph. No, she could only turn to one person. The one true friend who had stood by her all these years. Gwendolyn. She ran into the dark woods, ran until she reached the old woman's cabin. She found Gwendolyn rocking by the fire. The old woman's eyes glittered with anger. Catherine gasped for breath. She could not speak, but Gwendolyn knew everything. Gwendolyn kept rocking, her eyes locked on Catherine's. The town has reached its decision. Catherine nodded, not even pausing to wonder how the news had reached Gwendolyn so fast. They have ruled that you are to blame. Yes? Gwendolyn appeared calm. Catherine tried to take some comfort in that. And here I have tried to live in peace with these people for so long. These fools believe you have caused their bad luck, the old woman demanded harshly. It is time to show them some real bad luck. Gwendolyn stood slowly. She pulled back her lips and let out a long animal hiss. Catherine trembled. Was Gwendolyn truly crazy? Catherine wanted to run, but her legs would not cooperate. Gwendolyn's whiskery face began to darken. The whiskers grew longer. It is so dark in this cabin, Catherine thought. My eyes are tricking me. Then Gwendolyn uttered a longer hiss, a hiss of pain. Needle-sharp claws popped out of her outstretched fingertips. Gwendolyn's long silver hair whirled around her body as if it had come alive. Wherever it touched her skin, the skin turned black and furry. Moments later, tall, old Gwendolyn Parrish no longer stood before Catherine. In her place stood a black cat. The old cat stretched, arching its back. Then the cat cried, Come, Catherine, you can do it too. You are a shapeshifter. You are my daughter. Chapter 12. The old cat's yellow eyes locked on hers. I don't believe, Catherine stammered. Believe, the cat urged her. Catherine remembered her father's cry in a town meeting. She is not our child. Was it possible? Your daughter? She murmured. I do not understand. I had no husband, Catherine. Please, understand. I did not fear the shame for myself, but they would have teased you and tortured you. I could not bear the thought of that. Gwendolyn's voice trailed off. Catherine knew what Gwendolyn was thinking. Catherine had been an outcast all the same. She had not escaped her fate. And so, Catherine prompted, and so, one night, during a storm, I sneaked into the village, I bundled you up, and I left you on the doorstep of a respectable and childless couple. No one, not even the Hatchets, ever knew where you came from. All these years of misery, thought Catherine, all these years of not fitting in. As dazed and thunderstruck as she felt, Catherine knew in her heart that Gwendolyn told her the truth. She had never belonged in the Hatchet house. Never. You were born under the same evil moon as I was, Gwendolyn continued in her raspy purr. Catherine suddenly felt dizzy. She braced herself with one hand against the rough wooden wall. At first, the Hatchets seemed overjoyed with their good luck, as painful as it was for me. I felt sure I had made the right decision, Gwendolyn explained. But then the trouble started. Well, Catherine, you know the rest of the story only too well. You know all the bad luck that has struck the colony. Catherine nodded. The cat's eyes glinted. At last we are reunited. But we must hurry. Change, Catherine, now. I cannot. Catherine collapsed to the floor. Her eyes rolled back in her head. The cat licked her cheek with its rough tongue, bringing her back to consciousness, purring its harsh voice in her ear. Change, Catherine, change. I'm dreaming, Catherine thought, turning away. Her mind raced over her hundreds of visits to Gwendolyn's cabin. In one blinding flash, Catherine realized she had always belonged with Gwendolyn. The moment this thought crossed her mind, she felt a horrible pain. Her face contorted. She had never felt pain so intense. I am dying, she thought. She raised her hands to her face. The pain shot through her. She had scratched herself, deep scratches. She gave a cry that sounded more like a hiss. She stared down at her hands in amazement. Sharp, curved claws stuck out of each finger. Change. Change. Intense pain, like a hot branding iron sizzling her flesh, made Catherine arch her back and howl. She heard her bones bending, cracking. She let out another animal cry, and another. She caught glimpses of herself that was no longer herself. Shiny, lustrous hair spreading all over her body. The hair turned coal black as if it had been charred in a fire. Yes, that is right, Catherine. In a minute more she had changed completely. She was a cat, black like her mother, only younger, smaller, her coat shiny black without a touch of silver. Gwendolyn hurried to the front door. Catherine followed. They padded through the woods together. It felt so strange to be running on 4 feet, yet natural all the same. They reached a clearing in the dark woods. Gwendolyn paused, her tail bristling. Then she threw back her head and yowled, showing her fangs. Catherine gazed upward through a break in the trees. Hanging high above them shone a crescent moon. She opened her mouth, letting her own cat's yowl mingle with her mother's. Gwendolyn led the way. Back into the town. Catherine felt afraid, but she followed. They darted along the back of the meeting house, staying in the shadows. Was the meeting still going on? Her hearing much keener than before, Catherine knew that the meeting hall stood empty. They were all out searching for her, no doubt. But Catherine Hatchett had disappeared. They would never find her now. Gwendolyn padded on through the narrow lane between the 2 buildings. All at once, Catherine knew their destination, Joseph's house. Up ahead, Gwendolyn rubbed her cheek again and again against the side of the Parker house, marking her territory. They turned the corner. The front door stood slightly ajar. Catherine sniffed the air. She caught a familiar scent. Her sense of smell must have grown more powerful as well. She could recognize Joseph's presence all the way from here. "Use your instinct, Catherine," purred her mother. "Take your revenge." The door stood open only a few inches. Catherine stared into the dark space. She felt frightened, but she trotted forward, pushing through the opening. Her sharp eyes adjusted quickly to the dimness inside the cabin. Joseph sat in the large, high-backed wooden chair by the wall, his hat off, his legs crossed. He laughed at something, as he had laughed at her. At the sight of him, all fear left Catherine, replaced by hate. She raced forward, then she sprang. He did not turn until the moment she leaped off the floor. His face, full of shock and fear, presented her with a clear target. Yowling furiously, Catherine raked her claws across Joseph's face. The deep gouges filled with blood. The blood flowed in rivulets down his cheeks. She clawed him again. This time she aimed higher. His eyes. Joseph shrieked. He raised his hands to protect himself. Too late. His left eyeball popped like a bubble. Catherine slashed her claws across his right eye, again and again. Catherine did not quit until both eyeballs lay on the floor at her feet.